Have you ever noticed how the smallest changes, the quietest shifts, are often the ones that end up rewriting everything you thought was solid in your life? That is how this story began. Not with a fight, not with a confession, not with anything loud or dramatic. It started with silence. A different kind of silence. The kind you only recognize once your heart finally admits that something is wrong. My name is Daniel, and if I tell this story with a steady voice now, it is only because time has smoothed the sharpest edges. But back then, in those first uneasy days, I felt like a man walking barefoot across glass without understanding why the ground beneath him suddenly hurt. It began with her phone, of all things. Grace had never been secretive about it in the 9 years we were married. It used to sit face up on the counter, lighting up with group chats from coworkers or messages from her sister. But one evening, I noticed she flipped it face down when she set it beside her wine glass. It was such a small gesture that I almost ignored it, but the way her fingers lingered on it for a split second too long, the way her eyes flicked toward me as if checking whether I noticed, planted a quiet unease in my chest. Protective phone. First shift, she also began going to bed early. At first, I thought it was work stress. Her job in digital advertising could be demanding, and she had always been responsible, the kind of woman who finished every task before letting herself rest. But suddenly, she was tired every night. Not the kind of tired that made her want to cuddle into my shoulder, but the kind that sent her retreating into the bedroom alone. She would turn off the lights before I even made it upstairs, leaving me sitting there on the couch, staring at the hollow imprint she left behind. Going to bed early. Second shift. Then came the clothes. Grace had always dressed simply, elegantly, in a way that felt natural to who she was. But now she wore softer colors, new sweaters I did not recognize, jewelry that appeared out of nowhere. There was a new black coat with a cut that hugged her waist in a way she never used to prefer. It was subtle, almost tasteful in its quiet transformation, but it was a transformation nonetheless. Dressing differently. Third shift. And most of all, there was the distance. Not the loud kind. Not slamming doors or raised voices or weeks of arguments. No, this distance was polite, measured, almost gentle. The distance of someone who is slipping away while trying not to be noticed. The distance of someone who is already half gone. Emotional distance. Fourth shift. But, of course, I did what so many husbands in long marriages do. I told myself that every couple has phases. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself it was normal. Marriage teaches you to trust habits more than people, routines more than conversations, and sometimes that trust blinds you in a way you do not realize until it is far too late. And so I tried to explain away the quiet cracks forming in our everyday life. After all, we were in our late 30s, early 40s. Life gets busy. People drift and reconnect. That is what I believed, or at least what I wanted to believe. But memory is a strange thing. When something feels off, when silence stretches longer than it should, your mind begins putting moments together like pieces of a puzzle you did not know you were solving. A laugh that sounded forced, a kiss that felt half-present, a conversation that ended too quickly. One evening, these fragments aligned in a way I could not ignore. It was a quiet night, the kind of night where the house felt almost too still. We were sitting on the couch, a soft glow from the television reflecting across the room. The show was one we used to love watching together, something light and familiar, but the moment felt strangely unfamiliar. I sat at one end of the couch, she sat at the other, and between us lay an invisible wall neither of us had built intentionally but both of us were now living behind. She laughed once or twice at the screen, but it was a laugh without warmth. The kind of laugh you give when you are trying to appear normal. Then her phone vibrated. Just once. A small buzz. But it cut through the room like a blade. She reached for it quickly. Too quickly. There was a flicker in her eyes, something like panic or anticipation, and then she stood up, whispering she needed to take the call. She walked down the hallway with her voice lowered, and when she closed the door behind her, something in the air shifted, a temperature drop, a tightening in my chest, a heaviness I could not explain. It was in that moment I realized how long it had been since we had talked, really talked, without her eyes drifting away or her thoughts drifting somewhere I could not follow. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the muffled murmur of her voice behind the closed door, and something deep inside me recognized what my mind had been trying to deny. Long before betrayal becomes physical, it becomes emotional. Long before someone crosses a line, they walk toward it in small, quiet steps. Emotional affairs rarely begin with intention. They begin with a void inside someone, an emptiness they do not know how to fill. And when someone new steps into that void offering attention, validation, or understanding, the shift begins. Not as an act of cruelty, but as an attempt to feel seen again. At least, that is what every study says. People do not cheat to destroy a marriage. They cheat because something inside them feels invisible. And once that feeling becomes familiar, they begin rewriting the story of their own past to justify what their heart is drifting toward. A phenomenon therapists call rewriting the past. Suddenly, memories that were once warm are painted with shadows, moments that were once joyful are recast as flawed, and marriages that were once full of life are retold as empty chapters in need of escape. I did not know these terms back then, but looking back now, I see the patterns as clearly as the blueprint of a building. Late night calls, the protective phone, the early bedtimes, the way her new clothes reflected a version of herself she did not share with me. In the moment, though, I filled the gaps with excuses. That is what people do when they love someone. They choose temporary comfort over permanent truth. Another night stands out in my memory. Grace was sitting by the window scrolling through something on her phone, her face lit by the faint silver glow. I walked into the room quietly, not wanting to startle her, but even the soft sound of my footsteps made her jump slightly. She turned the phone over on her lap, face down, and smiled at me in a way that felt rehearsed. It was not the smile of a woman in love. It was the smile of someone protecting a world you are no longer invited into. Have you ever stood next to someone you have shared a life with, someone whose breath you used to memorize, and felt as though they were suddenly miles away? It is a strange kind of loneliness, the kind that does not come from being alone, but from being forgotten slowly. For many couples in midlife, these distances emerge quietly. Careers grow demanding, emotional needs shift, conversations shrink into routines, and routines harden into walls. Nobody names the distance. Nobody admits the silence. Outwardly, everything looks calm, but beneath that calm lies a slow unraveling. Looking back, I understand now that the signs were not subtle at all. They were just easier to ignore than confront. After all, who wants to believe that someone they love is slipping away? Who wants to believe that the home they built together has cracks running through it? And so, like many people my age, I stayed in the comfort of denial. I told myself that nothing was wrong, that marriages go through phases, that we would find our way back to each other if we could just get through the busy weeks. But deep inside, something told me the ground beneath us was already shifting. I could feel it in the way she paused before answering simple questions. I could feel it in the way she kissed me goodnight without leaning into it. I could feel it in the way she smiled at her phone more often than she smiled at me. That is how betrayal begins. Not with fireworks, not with dramatic endings, but with whispers, with subtle hesitations, with emotional footsteps moving in a direction your heart does not want to follow. And at that time, before I ever heard the word hotel, before I ever read a single message on her laptop, before I ever saw her car in a place it should not have been, the truth had already begun writing itself quietly between us. I just did not know how to read it yet. I would soon learn. But for now, all I had was a question lingering in the back of my mind, a question I tried too hard to ignore. When did the woman I love begin to disappear from me, one quiet shift at a time? And why did it feel like I was the last person in the house to notice? Have you ever had a moment in life when the truth did not arrive, like a shout, or a crash, or a flashing warning, but instead appeared in the form of a small, harmless notification? A sound so ordinary that you almost ignore it, yet so powerful that once you see what it carries, nothing in your world looks the same again. That is how the truth found me, not with fury or noise, but with a vibration on the kitchen counter early in the morning. It happened the day after Grace said she needed time to herself. I was standing by the stove waiting for the coffee to brew, still trying to convince myself that the distance I felt in her voice the night before was simply exhaustion. The house was quiet, filled with that soft morning light that filters through blinds in late autumn. And then, my phone buzzed. A single notification. Something from our shared credit card. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up without thinking, expecting a grocery purchase or gas charge. But instead, I saw the words that froze every muscle in my body. Ridgeway Garden Suites. Early check-in request approved. 7:47 a.m. Have you ever felt your heart stop without actually stopping? That moment when your body cannot decide whether to breathe or collapse. That is what discovery shock feels like. The brain enters a strange kind of stillness, a protective silence while it tries to make sense of information that does not belong in the world you thought you lived in. I stared at the screen, reading the text again and again, as if repetition might change the meaning. Boutique hotel. 10 miles away. Early check-in. It did not take imagination to fill in the rest. My throat tightened, my hands went cold, and yet, instead of anger rising in me, something else happened. Everything inside me went quiet. People assume that learning a painful truth triggers an explosion, but science says otherwise. The human brain, when confronted with trauma, has 3 instinctive responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Most imagine they would fight. Some imagine they would flee. But the truth is, in unexpected heartbreak, most freeze. The freeze response is the mind's way of buffering the blow, suspending emotion so it does not crush you all at once. Emotional numbness. A silent shield. That is what happened to me. I did not shout. I did not curse. I did not even move for several seconds. I just stood there, the steam from the coffee rising beside me, the house unchanged around me, while my understanding of my life twisted beneath the surface. Suspicion is a corrosive thing. It eats away quietly, and once suspicion meets evidence, even the smallest piece of it, something inside you shifts forever. I set the phone down slowly, as though putting it back on the counter could undo the information. But nothing could make those words untrue. Still, I told myself to breathe. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself the kind of lies we all tell ourselves when we are afraid of the truth. Maybe it was a work retreat. Maybe she booked a room for a friend. Maybe it was a mistake on the card. Maybe. People do that because temporary comfort often feels safer than permanent truth. But the longer I stared at the screen, the more undeniable the truth became. She was not alone on her birthday. She was somewhere she did not want me to see. The hours that followed blurred together. I tried going to work. I sat at my desk, staring at drawings and calculations that refused to make sense. My coworkers joked that I looked checked out, and they were right, but they did not know why. I could barely hear them through the buzzing in my mind. Every time I blinked, I saw the hotel's name. Every time I inhaled, I felt the weight of the unknown pressing against my ribs. The day dragged on in slow motion, a long stretch of time that felt both endless and hollow. Around lunchtime, I stepped outside to clear my head. The air was cold enough to sting my throat. I leaned against a concrete pillar and tried to steady my breathing, but even the simplest act felt unnatural. I replayed her words again and again. I need some time to myself. I will text you later. I will see you tonight. She had spoken with such ease, as if the truth did not tremble behind her voice. And the more I replayed it, the more I recognized that her distance had not begun yesterday. It had been building for months, each moment a microtrauma, small enough to ignore on its own but powerful once stacked together. The phone turned down. The early nights, the new clothes, the unfamiliar perfume, the protective smiles that did not reach her eyes. I took my phone out of my pocket, almost afraid of what I might see next. As if answering the thought, it buzzed. A text from Grace. Hey love, just getting settled. I will call you later. Just enjoying some quiet time. A small heart at the end, the kind she only used when she was trying too hard to sound normal. A heart meant to soothe suspicion instead of express affection. My own heart felt like it sank a few inches lower in my chest. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Eventually, I just sent a single word. Okay. Not trusting myself to say anything more. But even then, I was not ready to fully accept the truth. Denial is a powerful instinct. It protects you from collapsing too soon. That is why people in my situation often cling to hope longer than they should. But hope can blind as easily as it comforts. By late afternoon, I knew I could not sit with the uncertainty any longer. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the office without telling anyone why. My feet moved before my mind gave permission. I got in the car and drove, the road stretching ahead in a blur of shifting light and passing trees. The sun was beginning to sink, painting the sky in soft oranges and quiet purples. It was the kind of sunset I once would have pointed out to Grace, but now it only deepened the ache inside me. As I pulled into the parking lot of Ridgeway Garden Suites, something inside me slowed. The pavement glowed faintly beneath the street lamps. A few cars were scattered around, their windows reflecting the last traces of daylight. My heart did not race. It did not thunder. It settled into a steady, heavy beat, like it understood that panic would not help me now. I scanned the rows of cars one by one, and then, in the third row near the side entrance, I saw it. Her blue Honda, parked still, parked confidently, parked like it belonged there. In that moment, everything inside me went still. Not broken, not shattered. Still, the kind of stillness that comes when your body finally accepts what your heart has been running from. Discovery shock. That moment when reality splits quietly inside you. I gripped the steering wheel, not because I wanted to hold on, but because I needed something solid beneath my hands. The world felt suddenly weightless, as though the earth had dropped out from under my feet. I did not get out of the car. I did not storm toward the entrance. I did not pound on the door or shout her name. I just sat there, watching the hotel windows, watching couples walk in and out, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. I stayed because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, to give shape to the fear that had been living in the back of my mind for far too long. As I sat there, I realized something painfully true. Cheating does not begin in a hotel room. It begins in the silence between two people. It begins in the small ways they stop reaching for each other. It begins in the stories they tell themselves to justify new feelings they do not want to admit. The hotel was not the start. It was merely the proof. And so I remained in my car, breathing slowly, letting the cold evening air seep into my lungs. I did not cry. I did not rage. I did not fall apart. I just observed, accepted, registered the truth settling into me like sediment at the bottom of a river. People think the most painful part of betrayal is the act itself. But really, it is the moment you stop denying it. The moment the truth stands in front of you with no disguise left. When the sky turned fully dark, I finally started the engine. I drove away without looking back, not because I wanted to run, but because I knew there was nothing left there for me to see. The truth had already been delivered. The world had already shifted. And the man who pulled out of that hotel parking lot was not the same man who had driven in. What happens when you finally face the truth you have been trying so hard not to see? In my case, I went home and sat in the silence of my own living room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. The house felt colder than it had that morning. Emptier, larger. The kind of empty that makes you wonder how long the walls have been holding secrets you were too afraid to acknowledge. And yet, I felt an odd sense of clarity, as if my heart, numb as it was, had reached a decision my mind could not yet articulate. The truth was no longer hiding. The truth was no longer vague. It had a name, a place, a timestamp, and while I did not know what to do with it yet, I understood one thing clearly. Once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. And while the pain had only begun to unfold, I knew this was the moment my story changed from suspicion to certainty, from fear to clarity, from waiting to knowing. What would you do if the truth did not come from a hotel room or a whispered phone call, but from the quiet glow of a laptop screen left behind on an ordinary morning? What would you do if the evidence of your unraveling life sat inches away, waiting for you to lift the lid and face everything you feared? For me, the moment the truth fully revealed itself did not arrive with noise or drama, but with a soft chime from the machine that held the part of my wife's life I never knew existed. It happened the morning after I saw her car at the hotel. Grace was still gone. The house felt strangely hollow, as though every piece of furniture had shifted a fraction of an inch in the night. When I walked into the living room, her work bag was still by the armchair, The same place she had set it down while leaving in a rush the previous morning. I had no intention of going through it, at least not consciously. But as I made my way toward the kitchen, a small notification sound echoed through the quiet room, faint but sharp enough to freeze me in place. I turned slowly and saw her laptop screen blink awake for a second before dimming again. Have you ever felt a moment pull you toward it? Not with impulse but with an almost gravitational force, as though the truth itself was calling your name. That is what it felt like. I walked back to the armchair and rested my hand on the lid. I told myself I should wait for her to come home. I told myself I should let her speak first. I told myself I did not want to find anything that would break what little remained of my peace. But the freeze response does strange things to the mind. It slows your fear long enough for clarity to slip in. And in that clarity, I realized something simple but undeniable. Knowledge could not hurt me more than ignorance already had. Her password was a variation of our wedding date, something she once joked she would never forget. When I typed it in and the home screen appeared, my heart did not race. It sank. Slowly, heavily, as though preparing itself for the fall. A chat window was already open. The name at the top was Eli. 3 letters. No last name. Just a gray icon beside a conversation still active. New messages waited at the bottom. I remember staring at the screen, my breath suspended inside my chest as though the air refused to move. And then I read the first line. Still thinking about last night. You looked incredible. Each sentence felt like a small slice across skin that was already bruised. Eli, hope you are not feeling guilty again. You deserve to be happy on your birthday. Eli, did you talk to him yet? There are moments in life when reality tilts. Not violently, not dramatically, but with a subtle shift that tells you nothing will ever align the way it once did. Reading those words felt like watching the floor beneath me crack open silently. And yet, I did not slam the laptop shut. I did not shout. I scrolled, line after line, message after message, a timeline of intimacy that had not included me for months. Grace, I feel like I disappear at home. Eli, you do not disappear with me. Grace, sometimes I worry I am rewriting the story in my head to justify this. Eli, you are not. You are choosing yourself. There it was. The narrative shaping itself, a common pattern among emotional affairs. The past must be repainted darker, so the new connection appears brighter. Rewriting the past. A psychological shield that allows people to believe their betrayal is not betrayal but a correction, a shift towards something they think they deserve. Emotional affairs always come first. They begin with conversations that go a little too deep, a little too personal, a little too comforting. Then come the justifications, the small lies, the hidden smiles, the quiet anticipation. Physical betrayal is never the start. It is the symptom of a heart that has already strayed. As I scrolled further back, I saw the subtle escalation. The little confessions, the late-night comfort, the growing emotional dependence. The first time they met alone, the first drink, the first lie told to me about staying late at work. The first touch that was not accidental, each message stacked upon the next, forming a second life she lived parallel to ours. A life I had no knowledge of yet had been replaced by 2 lives in one marriage. Hers intersecting mine only where she needed stability. The rest belonged to him. The guilt was there in her words. I could see it. She apologized to him for feeling guilty. She also apologized for not being able to see him often enough. But guilt alone rarely stops an affair. If anything, guilt often pushes people deeper because they crave comfort, reassurance, validation, something new, something that convinces them they are still good even as they are hurting someone who loves them. Feeling seen by someone else is powerful. It can distort judgment, silence conscience, and create emotional dependency. I scrolled until I reached a message exchanged just the night before, while I was sitting at home, believing she was journaling or taking a quiet walk alone. Eli, so was tonight enough to convince you? Grace, it did not convince me. It confirmed me. Eli, in what way? Grace, that I cannot go back to how things were. Not fully. Not the same way. Eli, what does that mean for us? Grace, it means tomorrow I talk to him. Honestly, no more hiding. tomorrow, today. She had already planned her confession. Not a confession meant to heal, but meant to reshape the story in a way that softened her choices. She had rehearsed her reasoning. She had chosen her birthday as the turning point of her life with him. While I sat waiting for her at home, she was crafting the narrative she would deliver to me, one meant to explain her distance without revealing the full truth unless necessary. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly, almost mechanically, as though my body had forgotten how to breathe on its own. My hands shook slightly, not with rage but with recognition. I was reading not just words but intentions, consequences, a roadmap of her choices. And somewhere in the middle of it all, my heart shifted from pain to clarity. Have you ever experienced a moment where you suddenly understand that anger will not save you and despair will not protect you? That what you need is not an outburst but composure? That was my moment. I realized I did not want to be the man who reacted impulsively. I did not want to be the man who slammed doors or shouted questions he already knew the answers to. I wanted to be the man who walked into the confrontation with the entire truth in his hands, not for revenge, not to win, but to protect the part of me that still remembered who I was before all of this. So I took a breath and continued reading, not out of masochism but out of necessity. I needed to understand the full extent, the entire scope of the betrayal, because incomplete truths have a way of haunting you later. I scrolled to the newest messages at the bottom of the chat. Eli, are you okay? You went quiet again. I keep worrying you will back out. Please do not stay for him just because it is familiar. The audacity of the message hit me harder than the others, but still, I did not react. I closed the laptop gently, almost respectfully, as though being rough with it would somehow distort the truth inside. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, the silence louder, but beneath all that, a strange calm settled in my chest. Not peace exactly, but determination. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle across my shoulders like a heavy coat. My hands were steady now, my breathing even. There was no more doubt, no more denial, no more longing for the version of my life that no longer existed. I knew what had happened. I knew what had been lost. And I knew what needed to come next. Before confronting her, I connected a small USB drive to the laptop and saved the messages from the last month. Not as a weapon, not as leverage, but as a safeguard against future self-doubt. Betrayal has a way of rewriting memory, especially when the betrayer begins to offer softened versions of events. I needed the truth to remain intact, not for her, but for me. When I finally placed the laptop back into her bag exactly as I had found it, I felt something click inside me. A shift. A transformation. The moment where a wounded man becomes a man who understands his own worth. When the front door finally opened later that morning, when her footsteps crossed the threshold, I did not feel fear or panic or even heartbreak. What I felt was control. I was not stepping into her version of the truth. I was stepping into mine. The discovery had not just revealed her betrayal. It had revealed me to myself. What happens when two people walk into the same room but carry two completely different versions of the truth? One rehearsed, one raw, one crafted to soften the blow, one forged in the fire of undeniable evidence. That is exactly what happened the morning Grace came home. I heard her car in the driveway before I saw her. The sound of the engine shutting off, the click of the door, the slow, hesitant footsteps on the walkway. It was the walk of someone preparing to play a part. I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, calm in a way that felt unfamiliar but necessary. There are moments in life when composure becomes your only shield. This was mine. The doorknob turned with a soft metallic click, and she stepped inside, still wearing the coat she had left in. Her face looked tired, but not in the way someone looks after a sleepless night. It was the tiredness of someone who had spent too many hours rehearsing what to say, crafting explanations she hoped would guide the conversation in her favor. Her eyes scanned the room quickly before settling on me. "Daniel," she said softly, "can we talk?" A simple question. But even simple questions carry layers when trust has been broken. Her voice carried a practiced sorrow, a tone meant to lower defenses, a sound shaped by the story she intended to tell. People who cheat rarely come home empty-handed. They return armed with narratives, ready to explain not the truth, but the version of the truth that leaves them looking wounded rather than responsible. It is a subtle form of control, a way to steer a conversation towards sympathy instead of accountability. But I did not move from where I stood. I did not rush toward her or ask where she had been or why she left the way she did. I simply nodded slightly, gesturing for her to continue. That small silence, that refusal to play my expected role, startled her. She blinked, her breath catching for just a moment as she stepped into the living room and set her purse down with shaky hands. "Before I say anything," she began, "I need you to know I did not come home to lie to you." I watched her carefully. The words sounded sincere, but sincerity from someone who has lived two lives is complicated. She took a deep breath, likely ready to begin the script she had practiced with Eli, a script designed to present her as lost, confused, emotionally neglected, a softened version of betrayal, a rewritten narrative. But I said nothing. My silence stretched long enough to unsettle her. She had expected questions, tears, maybe anger. What she did not expect was composure. Composure shakes the foundation of a story built on control. "I am ready to take responsibility," she continued, her voice trembling just enough to tug at sympathy. "I want to tell you everything. I want to repair what I broke." Again, I waited. I did not interrupt. I did not encourage, and without the cues she expected, she faltered. Psychology calls this moment narrative disruption, when the betrayer loses control because the betrayed does not follow the emotional script they anticipated. Control slips. Truth leaks. She stepped closer, wringing her hands. It started because I felt numb. Not unloved, not unwanted, just invisible. I never meant for anything to happen. It grew slowly, and I did not know how to stop it. Her words poured out, fragile, carefully phrased, but still a softened version of the truth I had already seen. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "You ended it yesterday, right?" She nodded too quickly. "Yes, yesterday morning, before anything happened." Anything, that single word hung in the air like dust caught in light. She waited for me to accept it, to let her shape the story, to let her offer me the cleanest version of a very dirty truth. I looked at her steadily. "Grace, who were you with at the Ridgeway Garden Suites yesterday?" Her entire body jolted as if I had struck her. Her breath hitched, her eyes widened, her lips parted in a silent gasp. "You went there?" "No," I said calmly. "I did not need to. I saw the charge." The world seemed to tilt for her then. Her knees weakened, her shoulders collapsed inward, and she lowered herself onto the couch, as though gravity had grown heavier in the room. People think the tears shed in these moments are tears of sorrow for the person they hurt, but more often, they are the tears of someone realizing they have lost control of the narrative. "I can explain," she whispered. "Not yet. We are not at your explanation part." She froze, staring at me with wide, frightened eyes. The power dynamic had shifted. She felt it. I had taken back the one thing betrayed people often lose without noticing: the right to own the truth. I walked to the table and gently placed her work bag there. I slid the laptop toward her and opened the lid just enough for her to see the screen. "Eli seems very eager for you to text him back." Her head dropped as though someone had cut the strings holding her upright. She covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling through her fingers, but these were not the dramatic tears of someone devastated by love. These were the tears of someone whose carefully prepared performance had just shattered. "Daniel, please," she choked. "I did not want you to find out like this." Of course she did not. People who cheat want to confess on their own terms, at their own timing, with their own script. Enough truth to look honest, but not enough to look guilty. Enough tears to appear remorseful, but not enough to reveal the full depth of their betrayal. She lifted her face, streaked with tears, searching mine for something familiar, for gentleness, for anger, for anything she could latch onto to steer the conversation. But all she found was calm. "You said you wanted to tell me everything," I said softly. "So, tell me this. Was yesterday your first time with him?" The question sliced through the room. She froze completely. Her breath stopped. Her eyes widened in raw panic. The silence that followed answered more clearly than any words ever could. 1 second. 2. 3. Not denial. Not outrage. Not confusion. Only silence. That was my answer. She broke then, in a way that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with collapse. Her body folded inward, her shoulders shaking violently as sobs tore out of her. People think collapse comes from heartbreak, but more often it comes when a person realizes they can no longer manipulate the story. The tears of a betrayer are often the tears of someone who has lost control. I sat down across from her, not beside her. That small distance mattered. It told her without words that something in our marriage had shifted permanently. You said, "I made you feel invisible," I said quietly. "That I did not ask how you were doing. That I did not see you. Maybe there is truth in that. Maybe I missed things I should have noticed. But nothing gives someone permission to split a marriage in two instead of speaking up." She nodded weakly, tears dripping onto her hands. "I know. I know. I hate myself for it." I studied her carefully. This is why betrayed people need to regain control. Without boundaries, the emotional damage grows. Without clarity, guilt becomes a weapon. Without strength, the betrayer leads the healing, and healing led by someone who caused the wound becomes another wound. So I took a slow breath and spoke words that felt heavy but necessary. "Grace, I need you to leave the house tonight." Her head snapped up. "What? Daniel, please. I do not want to lose you. I want to fix this. I want to repair us." I shook my head gently. "You do not get to decide what this means for us. Not anymore. You made your choices. Now I make mine." Her face crumpled again, grief overtaking her features. But this time I did not step forward to comfort her. Her suffering was no longer mine to soothe. Her regret was no longer something I had to hold. She stood slowly, as though her legs barely remembered how to move. She reached for her coat with trembling hands, pausing at the doorway as though hoping I might change my mind. But some truths do not soften with time. Some boundaries must hold. I met her eyes with a calm I had earned through fire. "Yes, Grace. Tonight I need you to go." And with that, she nodded, defeated in a way that went deeper than sadness. It was not the sadness of losing love. It was the sadness of losing control over the story she tried to script. She stepped outside, closed the door softly behind her, and for the first time in our marriage, the silence she left behind felt clean. Not painful, not empty, clean, honest, almost like the truth itself. How does a man begin again after the truth has stripped away everything he thought he could count on? How does he learn to breathe when the air in his own home feels unfamiliar, as though the walls themselves have been rearranged? Those were the questions that met me the night Grace left and the silence finally settled into the house for real. It was not the tense silence between two people, pretending everything was fine. It was the full and honest quiet that follows after the storm has finally spoken. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no pretending, no performance, no waiting for the next fracture. Only stillness. In the days that followed, I found myself moving through the house with an almost ceremonial slowness, as if every object carried a new meaning. The coffee mug she always used, the blanket she left folded on the couch, the book she had abandoned on the table, these things were not reminders of what I had lost. They were markers of the life that had stopped belonging to both of us long before the truth came out. Healing begins quietly, often invisibly. Sometimes, it begins with a man standing in his kitchen at sunrise, realizing that for the first time in a long time, he is breathing without fear of what might happen next. The silence in the house was different now, not sharp or suffocating. It felt open, wider somehow, as if space had returned to its natural shape after having been compressed for too long. I slept alone that night, and though the bed felt too big, too cold, I did sleep. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. Enough for my body to show me that healing is not a straight line. It is a series of small permissions we give ourselves without even realizing it. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted thin shapes across the floor. I sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee and let the warmth of it anchor me. For the first time, I understood a simple truth. The world had not ended. The world had not even paused. Pain has a way of convincing us that everything around us must shatter in solidarity. But life keeps moving, steady and indifferent, reminding us that we still exist within it. A few days later, an envelope appeared on my front door, my name written in her handwriting, smaller than usual, as if her guilt had made even her letters shrink. Inside was a letter, not an explanation, not a justification, a confession. She wrote that she was sorry. Not sorry with excuses. Not sorry with conditions. Just sorry. She wrote that her choices were hers alone, that she did not expect forgiveness, that she did not ask for another chance. She said she wanted to take responsibility without asking me to soothe her guilt. It was the first act of respect she had shown me in a long time. But even that did not change the fact that healing would have to be my own journey. Not ours. Not hers. Mine. In the days that followed, I took walks around the neighborhood. Slow walks, without a destination, without urgency. I watched kids ride bikes without worrying about falling. I watched neighbors trimming hedges, carrying groceries, living their ordinary lives as though nothing monumental had happened in the universe. Because to them, nothing had. That realization was strangely comforting. My pain was personal but not defining. The world did not bend for it. And somehow, that helped me stand straighter. Healing is nonlinear. That is something most people do not understand until grief forces it upon them. Some days, I felt strong, grounded, aware. Other days, the weight of the betrayal pressed on my lungs again, making the simplest breath feel like labor. Therapists call this the grief cycle. Not a loop, but a tide. It rises. It falls. It returns when you least expect it. Part of rebuilding after betrayal is understanding that pain does not mean failure. It simply means you are human. One afternoon, maybe 2 weeks after she left, I found myself at the park near our old walking path. It was a place we used to visit without much thought, just a simple patch of lake and winding trails. Sitting there alone, I noticed that the water did not reflect sadness. It reflected the sky, unchanged. Healing often begins with noticing things that remain steady after your own life has shifted. A few days later, Grace reached out again. Not with a plea to come home, but with something quieter. I started individual therapy today. I am trying to understand how I became someone capable of this. Her message was not an attempt to pull me back. It was a sign that she was finally willing to confront the version of herself she had been avoiding. People over 50, therapists say, often rediscover their identity after betrayal, not because the betrayal defines them, but because it forces them to examine the parts of themselves they abandoned. For me, healing meant rediscovering my sense of self, separate from the marriage that had shaped so much of my adult life. I cooked my own meals again. I fixed things around the house without rushing. I listened to music without feeling the heaviness in my chest. I even reached out to old friends, people I had slowly drifted from without noticing. It felt like walking back to a version of myself that still knew laughter, still knew peace, still knew clarity. Weeks passed. The messages from Grace became fewer, shorter, more respectful. Then, one day in early spring, I found myself driving without a plan. The air was warmer for the first time in months. The world looked softer somehow, less harsh, as though winter had finally loosened its grip. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, and without consciously choosing it, I drove to a small cafe downtown. I was not surprised to see her there. Not in a romantic way, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that felt inevitable. She was sitting by the window, holding a mug of tea with both hands, as though she needed the warmth to steady herself. When she looked up and saw me, she did not cry. She did not look hopeful. She simply looked present. "Hi," she said softly. We talked. Not about the affair. Not about the wounds. Not about promises. We talked like two people who had learned something important about themselves the hard way. She told me about the parts of herself she had ignored for years. Her loneliness, her fear of aging, her struggle to ask for what she needed. I listened without feeling the need to fix any of it. Because healing is not about repairing the past. It is about understanding it so it no longer controls you. At one point, she paused and asked the question she had been avoiding. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head slowly. "No. Hating you would mean you still have that kind of power." Her eyes glistened, not with hope but with humility. Then she asked the harder question, "Do you think we will ever try again?" I took a long breath. I do not know. Right now, I am learning who I am without the version of us that broke. She nodded. I understand. I do not want to repeat what I broke. I want to become someone better than the choices I made. As we left the cafe, I realized something important. Closure does not come from answers. Closure comes from clarity. And I finally had clarity. Months passed. Life moved forward. I moved to a new apartment across town. Nothing extravagant. Just a quiet, modern place filled with light. I kept only the things that carried meaning. Everything else, I let go of. Grace helped pack one day, not as a reconciliation, but as a final act of respect. When the last box was loaded into the car, she looked at me with a gentle sadness. You look lighter, she said. I nodded. I feel lighter. Does that mean you are moving on from me? She whispered. Not from you, I said. Just forward. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she did not wipe it away. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth without trying to reshape it. We parted that day without promises, without bitterness, without the heaviness that once filled our home. Healing had not erased the past. It had transformed it into something I could carry without collapsing. I once believed losing her would break me, but losing the version of myself that accepted less than I deserved was the real beginning. Betrayal changes a man, yes, but healing changes him too. And sometimes, the person you become after everything falls apart is someone you never knew you were capable of being. So what do we learn from a story like this? That betrayal, as cruel as it is, often carries the truth we needed to face. That we are not defined by what we lose, but by how we rise after losing it. That in middle age, the most precious things we can protect are our peace and our self-respect. Happiness is not guaranteed for everyone, but clarity is something all of us can reach if we are willing to step through the pain instead of avoiding it.